Welcome to Clinical Perspectives, the show where we talk with the people shaping medtech to explore what it really takes to build, launch, and grow in the medical device industry. If you care about the future of medical devices, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Stephanie Stover, and today I'm joined by Jayren Stokes, Associate Territory Manager at BD. Jayren, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I'm honored to be here. So thank you.
Awesome, you're very welcome. So tell me about the origin story of BD.
Yeah, that's a great question. It started off early off, and I believe it's like the 16 to 1700. Big manufacturers in the needle space, they were kind of the first ones to cut over the needle. Just kind of some overlap there, so don't quote me on that. But they were the pioneers of a lot of medical device innovations. Started off in the needle space, eventually made its way to different kind of avenues. So we just had our biosciences recently that divested. And we've had our urology and critical division. So that's anything from endourology to home care to acute care and a government account team. So BD as a whole had very humble beginnings from one of the first needles, and then eventually came out with different things such as the Pyxis machines, which is the pharmaceutical dispensing drugs for hospitals. We've created shavers for patients with like spinal cord surgery. So typically they'll do a C1, a C2, or even down to C7. They'll shave off the facial hair behind the head, and then they'll use that as a shaver for patients. ED has kind of come a long ways from its beginning stages up until now, and there's a lot of great innovation in between that timeline up until the 21st century.
Wow. Now tell me about your role and your responsibilities within BD.
So my role as an associate territory manager, I cover all of Northern and Central California. So for me, that looks like is that I have usually a lot of clinics, usually upwards to 30 to 50 clinics that I'm usually servicing all throughout, let's say Chico, all the way down to Fresno, and then on the Central Coast. So you have Monterey, Salinas, and Santa Cruz. So my role is to make sure that, from a service perspective, that I'm providing them with samples. Usually when patients come into the clinics, they have to have samples for their catheters. So patients for urinary retention, usually supply line wise, that can be up to 6 to 7 times per day. That's at 30 days per month. And so you do the volume, one clinic can see about 30 to sometimes even more patients for like one catheter. So being able to supply them with enough catheters for their kind of cycle of their intermittent fasting. And then we also do just kind of your basics of like documentation. Working on the patient side of everything, we have to make sure that their patient orders are followed up. So any event that, let's say, a doctor or a NP or any kind of healthcare provider sends out a prescription, it's our job as reps to make sure that we fulfill that order from point A all the way down to point B of terms of like when they place the order down to when they actually get their order. I like to kind of describe it as like reducing friction. So it's like with patients constantly calling the hospital, they're not really understanding of how the DME world works because the DME
Mhm.
world works with just durable medical equipment. It's a very big space. Coming from myself, when you go to the doctors, it's like they place the order. You don't know about where it comes from, who it comes from. There's usually no communication between you and your doctor. And so BD Bard, Liberator Medical Supply, myself, the rep. My job is kind of educate the staff in the clinic about how that process looks like, but also too, even the doctors, because sometimes it starts off with the doctor. It kind of goes down to that top down effect where you can describe it to an MA, but 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to forget because they're very busy with other tasks throughout the day. So being able to educate my staff and also like my other clinics about like what goes on in the background and how can I make their lives easier. And so besides providing service from catheters and other kind of supply products for their clinic, we also do like a lot of in services. So, whenever there's a new product launched into the market, for example, Purix specifically being covered by insurances and most insurance, whether it's commercial or it can be state funded. Usually what that looks like is that we're conducting in services. So we're trying to see if some of our clinics would be able to utilize this for their patients. Is it like worth our time? Is it not? So it's kind of like this back and forth game. If you have a cancer urology center, they might benefit from it, but someone that's like maybe going to see like pediatrics, they're probably not going to benefit from Puric as much.
Right.
And so that's kind of like what I do on a day to day basis outside of the typically road travels. There's a lot of emails, phone calls, and a lot of just kind of back and forth between our supplier team, but also to our clients on the other hand.
So are most of your clients recurring clients, or are you typically outsourcing or doing outreach and trying to find new clients for BD?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's kind of a mix of both, actually. So we have recurring clients, and so how that typically works, it's in about two forms. The first form is through clients that have reordering. So let's say, for example, there's Stanford Healthcare Center. If there's a patient that has been there for 5+ years, that's considered like a reorder patient. So that's typically a customer that we see on and on and off, as well as rehab facilities. So we have rehab facilities where patients that are paraplegics, anything that allows them to sell cath for life, they typically will have catheters. And so that's kind of more of a recurring patient. Now, from the account side of everything or the clinic side, usually we've had recurring business from major clinics. Now, in my business space, at any point, there can be kind of times where you can lose business. And so being able to kind of maintain that business, but also grow that business is very important. But that's kind of like one aspect of it. The other aspect of it's like if we're trying to grow the business, try to target different accounts in that area versus just having that reorder. So yeah, we do have reorder patients, but we're also trying to grow the business. So it's a mix of.
Okay. Now, when you talk about growing the business, what specifically are you responsible for, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So for me, growing the business, what that looks like. So whether, let's say, for example, it's an internal account where we have business previously, maybe let's say, for example, there's like 5 new MAs or 5 new RNs. Part of my role is to make sure that I connect with them on that level of like educating them, providing all the basic level services of like what we have to offer at BD. And then from there, going on and then maintaining and growing that relationship and also that business with them as they send more prescriptions to BD or Liberator. And then on top of that, the other aspect of it is that if I were to grow the business, so let's say we have most of my space is adult urology clinics. Let's say, for example, there's pediatrics. There's a lot of pediatrics in all of Northern and Central California, to name a few. Stanford Healthcare, UCSF, or Shriners Hospital, as well as Children's Hospital of Madera, California. So being able to get into those spaces and to grow those accounts are super, super important because those are, we call them specialty accounts here at BD. And so because of that, we are able then to kind of target those specific clients and then maintain that relationship over time.
Okay. Now, what got you into this space? Yeah, what brought you into this space? What are you passionate about? How did you get here?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, if anyone ever looks at my LinkedIn, you'll see that I attended nursing school actually. So, I went
Oh,
to the Queen's University of Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina. Went to nursing school there. Didn't finish, unfortunately. Actually, I remember I like to tell the story to everyone. So, I remember I was in the airport one day and I was in Las Vegas airport and I was studying for my finals essentially at the time. And I remember like having my laptop open on this desktop and, with anatomy speaking, with things that are gross for the general public that are not in healthcare, they tend to see that and be like, that looks very disgusting. So for me, I remember I was actually studying skin integrity. So it was like stage 1 all the way to stage 4 or 5 of skin integrity care wounds or wound care. And I remember this vividly. As I'm studying this, I had this business owner comes up to me, him and his wife, really great couple. We're making some small talk. I'm just trying to understand him. He's trying to understand me. And he really got to the core of myself. And he really started to ask me questions. And he asked me the question. I still think about it to this day. He says, "Why are you lying to yourself?" And I say, "What do you mean?" And me being at the time, being young, why am I lying to myself? I take that with pride. And so I go, "Well, what do you mean?" And he goes, "Why are you lying to yourself?" And I say, and I know what he's talking about, but he's not directly telling me that point on, I realized that what I was doing all the way in North Carolina, all the way from California, I was really doing myself a disservice of not going into this industry. And what I
mm,
say that is because before going into nursing school, I knew that I wanted to work on a clinical side of everything, but also the business side, but not really become a nurse at true heart. My main goal at the time was to become a nurse and do part-time real estate, but that clearly wasn't the case. So for me, the reason I go into medical sales was specifically in the acute neurology side, but mainly specifically just working with nurses, being my core clients, is that having a background in healthcare, specifically nursing school, I've actually have family and friends that are all nurses. My sister, my brother-in-law, they're best friends. My mom's a pharmacist. But mainly the nursing aspect is that I really wanted to kind of give back to patients and kind of it comes within my blood itself. I think just coming from a nursing background and this is like why I'm in it. It's just from that one interaction, but having that family influence along the way.
so what is it about the business side of it? You talked a lot about the nursing side, but what was it about the business side that brought you in?
Yeah, good question. So for me, the business side, so growing up, I would say I was pretty early exposed just early on to just business in general and just working at a young age. And so for me, I've always had this like entrepreneurial kind of spirit. I think growing up, I would say it's also my DNA. My grandpa at the time actually had a bunch of businesses that were bars. He was actually in the military. And so being in a foreign country kind of forces you to figure out things and how to navigate different languages. And so for me, my uncle, he had a bunch of bars in the Philippines. And so kind of started off early on there as I took note to that. And then later on down the road, same thing. My dad, he actually has a business himself. He medically retired now, but he does kind of more host selling on the side of online. So that's kind of what keeps him alive. But I would say the main driving force for me to go into business is because throughout high school and college, actually, I would say I was very social as a person. I just like to be curious. I like to understand processes, really just try to find a solution. Up until college, I had a photography and videography business. Really try to scale that and to really grow and to learn the business, but also too just to take it upon myself. So that was kind of like I would say the early pioneer stages of what drives me. But I would say internally, I think it's within my DNA. As clingy as that, or crazy as that sounds.
No, it doesn't sound crazy at all. That sounds like a perfect mix. What is it about working with nurses that really brings you that passion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most people that are not in healthcare or don't, that doesn't understand the healthcare hierarchy structure, typically it starts off as your typical top of the food chain. So you have your hospital administrators, your C-suite levels, executives. Those are typically the top, going down to the bottom, which is like people that work in other aspects of just different departments. And so when you think of that kind of the hierarchy as a whole, it makes you think about what's in the middle, which is typically your nurses, your RNs, anyone that has just generally a bachelor's at the time. And so if you think about like the day-to-day departments of different departments of the hospital, you typically see one person, and that first person is typically a nurse. And if you can go into any other department, it's the same thing. And so for me, it makes sense because they are the backbone of the healthcare system. They are the first people responding to code blues. They are the first people responding to major things. It's not to discredit other people's backgrounds and their experiences, but in terms of like real life, first time, right on the spot, nurses are the first ones that are going to be on the spot, generally speaking. And so, because of that, I like to see that because it makes me think about nursing as a whole and what their jobs are on a day to day basis because they have a big impact on patient outcomes. They have a big impact on everything. And on my side of on business, they pretty much dictate of what goes out into who sends what prescription and what kind of catheter that they may want to use or what's really anything. So the nurses are always at the forefront. They are the primary person that are always responding and talking to everyone and mostly doing everything on the back end that kind of helps alleviate, the stress from the doctors and everything like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what are your goals for career wise for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me being early on in my career, I have a lot of big aspirations as any person would, but I think for me, I would say I'm pretty solid on wanting to go into some type of like management role. I think for me growing up, I've always saw myself as a leader in the sense that whether it's empowering people, uplifting people, encouraging people, and in any kind of way showing leadership skills, I see myself in a management role, whether that's a regional sales manager or that's, going to be a training role, anything that deals with empowering, uplifting, and also just raising people up. That's what I see myself in. And it kind of comes back to the nursing aspect as well, too. As nursing, we are empathetic, sympathetic individuals. We understand things. And so I think that nursing aspect kind of translates over to like a management role because they go hand in hand very well.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch back to just talking about the medical device industry a little bit. What challenges are you seeing in 2026 that other people are talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the biggest challenge that we've been having is just the Medicare, but also just insurance world as a whole. This space of DME specifically, very relatively very young. It started off, I believe, in the early '90s. So this world of home care that BD brands itself as DME world of catheters is still very brand new. And so being still brand new, there's always changes constantly happening from the company's perspective, but also too from the insurance side. And the biggest thing I think I would notice in this space or the challenge or the problems is that the insurance world is always constantly changing. And so because it's constantly changing, we have a team dedicated that are knowledgeable and skilled to understand those processes in the back end. As reps, we're not really much knowledgeable about the insurance in the field. We understand the
Right.
baseline aspects of it, but we're not the go-to person. And so because of that, because it's an evolving field, we typically train human beings. It goes on to the reps, and then from the reps, it goes on to the clinics. And so you get a lot of kind of miscommunication between like the clinic side, but also to the rep side and the company side. And because of that, there's never really much like a streamlined process of like, this is how it is and this is what is going to happen. Very much miscommunication, just because at the end of the day, we are human beings, we are flawed, and there's a lot of errors. And so an example of that is because if you have, let's say, like a documentation aspect, of a verbiage for chart notes, there has to be specific verbiage to support the case for the patient. And let's
Mm.
say, for example, Medicare changes something like anytime or just something happens, which I don't know at the end of the day because that's not what I'm knowledgeable about at the moment, that can impact the patient's order. And so it's the small things that add up over time that makes the clinics like roll, but also to their just kind of, I guess, stress levels that makes them very, very hard and makes them stressed as a whole.
How does that affect your day-to-day workflow?
Yeah. So it typically affects it by having to, I would say, call constantly back and forth. So like we typically call our supplier line. They're known as Liberator Medical Supply. And that company specifically that we partner with BD or Bard. And it's a constant like back and forth. They are busy people. They're worrying about phone calls, incoming phone calls. They're worrying about documentation. They're worried about sizing PDFs to send out to their insurance and all little fine details. As reps, it can annoy them because they're on the back end trying to do their job while we're also trying to do our job and work kind of cohesively. And so because of that, there's like this back and forth of like, oh, you don't need this, you do need that. And so there's just a lot of, I would say a lot of just back and forth between two companies. And to have it streamlined would be great at the end of the day.
Let's talk about medical device industry as a whole. Are there any myths that people believe or talk about often that you disagree with?
Yeah. I think one of the things that people talk about is how we tend to be a lot of med device kind of, I would call them specialties in this case, because you have things from like neurology to DME, orthopedics, and neurovascular. So I call them specialties. I would say the biggest thing that a lot of people tend to think about our industry or just when they leave is that we don't provide value. At the end of the day, this
Oh,
is a sales role, which everyone totally gets, and that's something that I'm aware of. But people tend to think that I would say from the non-sales aspect of like, so for example, the healthcare providers and anyone that works in a general hospital setting, there tends to be this, like I would say, unfamiliar, like how everything works in the back end in terms of like what we actually do. Because from their perspective as a clinical professional, they're only concerned about the patient. And as reps, when they see us walk in, at least like for example, speaking on the operating room side, this is very common in the operating room space where as a clinical professional, their main goal is to help the patient and that's it. And make sure that that patient's taken care of. When they see reps, typically from a company, whether it's for a new product demonstration, it's for a surgery case, anything along with just dealing with them one on one, their first instant reaction, depending on the relationship at the time, tends to go to they're just trying to sell me something. They're not here to do much. They're more of a nuisance, if anything, to be in the hospitals. That is probably one of the biggest things that a lot of reps face in the field. And coming from the operating room side, I could definitely speak with a lot of experience that you do have a lot of people generally in the healthcare system that don't understand what we do as a role. I like to describe it as this, where if there was no screws, for speaking from orthopedics, if there was no screws, if there was no robot, if there was nothing, if there's no trays to begin with, there can be no surgery. So I like to kind of bring it back to that aspect of like, we are here for the patient. We provide the materials and we're doing our job to make sure that we help you. Having reps in that general vicinity can be kind of stressful, which I totally get. A lot of nurses and any kind of healthcare professional, they see us reps, they don't know we've been trained on things. They think we just come there to create chaos. Our job there is to make sure we create space for us and mainly importantly for the patient at the end of the day. That's why we do what we do in the operating room specifically is because we're patient first. And coming working in the operating room and spine myself, I could definitely say with sure confidence that if you mess up in the operating room at any time, your trust with any staff will go down the drain. And so because of that, we get trained very well on these products and we make sure that we try to do very well in the surgeries because that's someone's life at the end of the day. And this is our livelihood. And this is something we're passionate about. So that's one of the things that I would say is pretty commonly, I guess, misunderstood or some, I guess, myths about what we do is that we're just there to sell, which we are. But the main goal is the patient outcome at the end of the day. The sales aspect is that's just part of it. I always tell like new sales reps, it's like if you can look at the sales process for medical devices, your sales process will be a lot easier if you focus on the human perspective first. That's the most important thing. That way, everything else will kind of fall through and everything else will just make sense.
mhm. You know what? I think that's the one of the best answers to that question that I've had. It was very well
Oh,
articulated, and And I absolutely can see what you're saying. That was fantastic. If you had a magic wand that you could wave to solve any one problem, what would it be?
That's a great question. So I would say one thing that I would solve if I had a magic wand, I would say I'll bring back to the operating room case because in my space, I can't really think of anything that would kind of
Mm,
solve everything because my world is very complex, more complex than the operating room side, just because there's so many factors, there's so many external influences. But from the operating room side, if I were to just get my magic wand and say, hey, this is what I want to fix, I would say the times of cases being canceled, delayed, or even postponed. Typically in the operating room, if anyone has generally worked in the operating room, they know that there's a board with all the different surgeries. They know that there's, we call them a fishbowl in the OR core, which is basically this kind of command station where all the nurses that are working on their desktops make sure that they're answering phone calls from patients, doctors, so that they can make sure that the surgery looks great, everything's flowing smoothly. They are like the command station. If they are not in there, well, chances are everything else is going to go to chaos. And so, if I were to wave my wand, I would say that being able to have real time updates to surgeries, I would think it's super, super important because we are human beings. And as nurses, for example, they are tied to so many different tasks throughout the day, despite their one main priority, which is patient care. They have admin work, they have different things that they take care of. And so, if there was a system, if there was a process where reps in real time and as well as the hospital too, because any kind of communication is very important. The moment communication and the OR side is even 2 minutes, that's 2 minutes away from something else that's more important. But being able to talk in real time or figure out where, like what time surgeries are starting, what time they're ending, if they're canceled, if they're postponed, any real time update where that can be put for both people because that's a lot of resources from the, for example, from the medical device company side. If they're providing company cars, if they are providing stipends, that's money I would say down the drain because that's money that could have been spent elsewhere. That could have been money for the rep to stay in that hospital, to not go outside, or for that nurse not to go out there and try to find the rep when they could have been saving
yeah.
someone else's life in the OR, or, whatever the case is. That's what I would say would be something where they can then kind of pivot because time in the OR is very crucial. Every minute matters because that delays surgeries, that delays people from going home, that delays people in general. We all want to go home by a certain time. We all want to do a great job of what we do for work. But that one issue I would say is the biggest aspect that really just pushes a lot of people, to just end up giving up about working in the
Sure.
OR because it's just the constant surgeries, constant unknowns, constant, hey, I gotta be home late at 10 p.m. today. Gotta cancel dinner. So
Yeah. Just kind of bringing some order to some of that operating room chaos. Makes sense. Any last piece of advice or message that you would like to leave listeners with?
yeah, it's a great question. If anyone wants to get to this industry, if any new person, whether they're coming out of college or maybe they are a D1 athlete, maybe they are coming from the military, really all walks of background. I like to tell people that this industry is a fantastic industry. As cliche as it sounds, I think this is one of the best jobs in the world to have because you're making a great impact on people. You're making a great impact on patient care, on patient health. Are we the ones touching the patients and interacting with them? No, but we do play a vital role in terms of what happens for that patient. Goes back to the operating room sense of if there is no screws, if there is no hardware, there is no surgery. And so being able to as heavily physically bring that in our hand is very rewarding. It makes you think about this is going to be someone in someone's back, this is going to be in someone's body, helping them out. And so for the people coming into this industry, I would say the biggest misconception too, as well, is that a lot of people tend to have this preconceived notion that they have to have healthcare experience. They have to become an RN. They have to become a doctor. They have to be very smart, which I would say this is very not true. There are a lot of specialties like electrophysiology that are very, very technical. Typically, people with biomedical engineering backgrounds is what they typically hire, generally speaking. But I would say for the most part, anyone that wants to get in from any walks of life, they should be willing to come in here knowing that they will be trained on the products. They will do great, but it just takes time. And to not be afraid is what I would ultimately say, because I learned a lot from her walks of life and met people that played Division 1 athletes, very professional, hardworking individuals. And then you get people that are just very passionate about what they do in healthcare. And so you get a mix of everything. And I love that. So I would say for people that are looking to get into this industry, don't be afraid of who you are as a person and make sure that you can feel confident in yourself, knowing that even if it's not what you think you want to do because of your experience, that shouldn't let you apply for any job, and you should continue on to push past that.
Where can people follow you or get in touch?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, they can either do my personal emails, Jayren Stokes19 at gmail.com. It's JAYREN STOKES 19 at gmail.com. Or they can get in contact with me via LinkedIn, first and last name. So Jayren Stokes is my LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can find Jayren on LinkedIn. His handle is his name, Jayren Stokes. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you so much.